Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes our Vietnam veteran, Mr. Baird.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you holding this session. And, you know, I want to add my condolences to the Gold Star families. As the chairman mentioned, I did my time in Vietnam, and I can appreciate the sacrifice that those families and those soldiers made during that war. So I also appreciate the generals, General Milley, General McKenzie, for both of you being here and willing to talk to us and see if we can find some answers to help these Gold Star families. So I really do appreciate that. And you know, I guess I want to go to the point of also mentioning that one of the 13 service members that were killed during that evacuation came from my district, and that was Corporal Sanchez. And so I express my condolences to that family as well. In fact, I attended the funeral, and it's always unfortunate when we lose service members. But I guess I want to, in that same vein, I want to change my focus a little bit to the fact that we left about $7 billion worth of military equipment and weapons that was intended for the Afghan military. However, it was abundantly clear that prior to the shutting down the Bagram Air Base, that the administration knew that the Afghan army was destabilized and demoralized. And it was just a matter of time till the Afghanis would fall, leaving these weapons in the hands of the Taliban. So last year, these weapons started to pop up in other conflicts, including Kashmir region, and this was left a war chest of weapons in the hands of the Pakistani-based military group that are designated by the United States as FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations. So General Milley, did the Biden administration have any advanced knowledge that the U.S. weapons and equipment left behind would not be used by the Afghan military and would be seized by the Taliban? And so when was this decision made to notify the Afghan military about these new possessions of these weapons?
Those weapons, as you mentioned, were part of the foreign military sales or assistance over 20 years. So that $7 billion is over 20 years. How much of those weapons were throughout the whole country? I mean, they were spread out all over the place. So there was no specific indicator that I can recall that said this group of weapons is going to go over to the Taliban or anything. We knew that the Afghan military had those weapons. Those were out there. These are weapons. These are night vision devices. These are wheeled vehicles, et cetera. But there was nothing that was specific to say this unit or that unit is going to hand off their weapons to the Taliban or any of that kind of stuff. The general, but I think an important point here is the United States military did not leave that equipment. That equipment was given to the Afghan security force. So when we gave, in Vietnam, the war you fought in, when we gave equipment to the South Vietnamese army, the ARVN, and the North Vietnamese overran South Vietnam, the Americans didn't give that equipment to the North Vietnamese army. That's the ARVN. That's the South Vietnamese army doing that. So the same thing is true, say, in Korea or anywhere else. So I want to make sure that, you know, it's not a U.S. decision on that equipment, because that is Afghan-owned equipment at that point in time. And it's completely impractical. Frankly, it would have been quite dangerous for us to try to go out and try to police up that equipment in the summer of 21. It wasn't feasible. We had 2,500 Special Forces guys, and that kind of wasn't their task and purpose. The Afghan government collapsed, the Afghan military collapsed, and the IG, the Special Investigating IG, estimates $7.2 billion worth of U.S. manufactured equipment, not U.S. owned equipment, ended up in Taliban hands. And I do believe, I think there's probably some reporting out there that indicates some of that equipment has been sold on black markets, et cetera. And I have zero doubt that some of that's in the hands of people who have nefarious objectives towards the United States.
I thank you, and my time is expired, so I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Mr. Waltz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for coming in. I got to tell you, Mr. Chairman, the more I listen to this hearing, the more infuriated I get. And I know the Gold Star families sitting here have to feel the same way. I know every veteran watching today has to feel the same way, because it's not about us. It's about them. And I think what upsets them most, General Milley, General McKenzie, are some of the statements from the president during this evacuation, including an interview that the president gave on national television during the withdrawal on August 18th, saying the generals never advised me to leave 2,500, and the only airbase, Bagram Air Base, in the world, sandwiched between China, Russia, Iran, and a platform to stay after counterterrorism. General Milley, is that an accurate statement that the generals never advised him to leave a stay-behind force to keep a lid on half the world's terrorist organizations?
I will tell you what my thoughts were at the time, my assessment.
Well, let me just say, you've testified today, you both testified repeatedly,
Yes.
that you advised the National Command Authority we should leave a stay-behind force, including the base.
Plus NATO, plus
That's right.
contract. That's correct.
Did President Trump leave that stay-behind force despite his stated desire to get everybody out because the Taliban didn't meet the conditions?
When the administrations changed hands, there were 2,500 soldiers, and that was a
Did you
decision.
then, and you've stated today you didn't advise Biden to pull everybody out. You advised him to stay.
That's correct.
So that's an inaccurate statement. But let's go down the list here. Let's go back to July of 2021. President Biden, there's a likelihood, there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely. Does that comport with your knowledge at the time? In fact, you just a few weeks later said Kabul will be surrounded in 30 to 60 days.
My assessment at the time was if we went to zero in U.S. military forces, then there was a high likelihood of a collapse of the government of Afghanistan and the ANSF with the Taliban taking over.
Would collapse.
But I thought it was going to be, I personally thought it was going to be in the fall, somewhere around Thanksgiving. The assessments vary widely.
We're talking within months.
Within months of our withdrawal, that's correct.
The next one, there's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of an embassy in an embassy of the United States from Afghanistan. It's not at all comparable with Saigon. I think this picture proves that not to be the case. Fair enough. Joe Biden, July 8th, 2021. Next one, Americans should understand we're going to try to get it all done before August 31st. And if you're an American, if there's American citizens left, we're going to stay to get them all out. Was that your understanding of the operational planning at the time, to stay beyond August 31st, or were you planning to get out by August 31st?
We plan to get out by August 31st.
Last, but perhaps the most egregious. We believe about 100 to 200 Americans remain in Afghanistan with some intention to leave. You both testified today, you just testified, General Milley, that it was impossible to know the number. In fact, is that accurate? It was very difficult to know the number.
Very difficult, and I don't think the numbers were accurate.
Yet the State Department's revised that number since to nearly 1,000 Americans left behind. Look, in July of 2021, Bagram is closing. We're withdrawing our four-star commander, General Milley. Ghani is visiting President Biden, practically begging us to at least leave our contractors and some little bit of air support. General McKenzie, you've testified that you were so concerned in July of 2021 that you put up recommendations, including lily pads to get our allies out, putting pieces in place to process our SIVs faster, putting measures in place to get our American citizens out, to get our allies out, and to take care of what American military should do, which is protecting all Americans. You were so concerned in July of 2021, you put those recommendations forward. That's what you've testified today.
That's correct.
And in fact, also, the diplomats on the ground, Mr. Chairman, sent a dissent cable. 23 diplomats saying if you continue down this road, disaster will ensue. Was that dissent cable shared with either of you? This is a formal channel going to the Secretary of State himself. Was that shared with you as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs? Was that shared with you as the commander?
I've never seen it.
I didn't see it at the time, and I haven't seen it since, and I would like to see that dissent.
I think the American people would like to see that. Chairman, here's my question for you. Do you know where the Secretary of State was on August 13th? The day before Kabul fell? Do you know where the Secretary of State was? Despite all of your concerns that State Department wasn't planning fast enough, we weren't getting our people out. According to the Washington Post, he was in the Hamptons. He was in the Hamptons on vacation. Secretary of State Blinken. I don't know. I can't even imagine how that makes our Gold Star families feel. Look, here's the bottom line, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your indulgence. I'll close with this. The State Department, to use a military term, had its head up its rear. It wasn't planning. It, in fact, thought we could just have an embassy and the good Taliban terrorists will take care of the bad Taliban terrorists. I mean, that's essentially what happened. And because of that, we didn't get our people out. We didn't get our citizens out. We didn't have the force posture. We didn't have the basing. We failed, and their loved ones are dead because of it. I apologize to you, to my Gold Star families. Your government failed you. There is a difference, gentlemen, and I know you both know this, in taking responsibility and accountability. A lot of people have taken responsibility. No one has been held accountable, and they deserve but better. Your government failed you, and I'll give you an opportunity in my time remaining, Mr. Chairman, if there's anything you all would like to say publicly on the record.
I'll give the witnesses time to respond, but the time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The gentlemen's, they have a right to respond.
Well, I'd like to take you up on that offer. I've talked to these families.
And I thank you for that.
I've met the other families, and I have committed to them, and I will do so again publicly to all of you, that I will work with them to get you the answers, to make sure that accountability, transparency is established. And I'm going to do that till the day I go in the grave. That's what a soldier does. And I'm not going to turn my back on these families or any other Gold Star families. There are other Gold Star families in this room right now. Jane Horton's in this room. I've been working with her for years. There's many others. And they know who I am, and I will work with them forever.
They deserve accountability, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General Milley.
I agree 100%. Chair recognizes Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank our witnesses for their service to our country and recognize the Gold Star families who are joining us today. General Milley and General McKenzie, you have mentioned today with some frequency about the impact and lack of coordination regarding the withdrawal of U.S. troops and its impact on U.S. contractors, advisors, and logistics. What impact did that have on the Afghan military?
So the pulling out of contractors and advisors had a profound effect on the Afghan military's ability to operate. General Milley's already talked about when we came off the Kandaks, to use a term of art, when we lost our ability to see down in the combat formations back in the summer of 20, that was a major blow. But then when we made the decision to go from 2,500 to 0, you're bringing out all your people that actually make sure the Afghan logistics system works. Let me give you an example very briefly. So before we went below 2,500, if a box of mortar rounds went at Afghanistan, you'd drop it on the ramp at HQ or maybe Bagram. There'd be a contractor there. You'd tag it. You'd have visibility on it as it went down through the Afghan system to get to the Kandak it was going to. Once you pull out that capability, you drop the mortar rounds off on the ramp and you have no idea where those things go. No idea at all. They could be going directly to the bazaar. They could be going to the Taliban. You just don't see it. So that capability is gone. But more perniciously, perhaps, is what it meant to Afghan aviation, the one sort of asymmetric advantage that they had. So we wanted to keep our contractors in there as long as we could, but they had to come out. We tried desperately to come up with schemes to help them. We looked at long-distance televideo maintenance, which has been tried by airlines in the United States with indifferent success in a technically literate population. So we knew we were swimming upstream with this. So it's difficult for me to overestimate the negative, synergistic, pernicious effect drawing down these capabilities had on the Afghan military.
No, that was obvious for people to estimate in advance, and it was obviously what happened on the ground.
And this was foreseeable. This was not a surprise.
Yeah. And so did the U.S. ever come up with a plan to properly make up for the loss of these key capabilities?
We tried, what I'd call heroic measures. We had a forward, over-the-horizon, security cooperation office in one of the Gulf countries, but it just doesn't work. You can't. You have to be there. You got to be with your partners. And the degree to which you're not with your partners, it doesn't mean you're fighting for them. You're not doing that. What you're helping them do is manage complex logistics systems and ensuring that graft and corruption isn't overwhelming. But you pull that all off and you lose that visibility and you lose the ability to help them as well. And so I think that's a significant factor in the collapse of the Afghan military in 2021.
Was there any long-term planning for how the U.S. would be able to continue to support our longtime allies in the Afghan military at all?
We did, but again, so you work under the conditions that you're given to operate, which is there's not going to be anybody on the ground. So, you're going to, ideally, in a perfect world, there'd be 650 U.S. forces guarding the embassy and a handful of people in the embassy that might be able to do some limited form of security cooperation. But nothing at the ministerial level even, and certainly nothing at the corps or the formation levels that's there. So really very hard to see a way forward.
Was President Biden ever informed that the U.S. military hadn't yet figured out how to provide logistics and maintenance support for the Afghan military? That's
a question I can't answer. I just don't know the answer to that.
General?
Yeah, I think there were plans presented. They certainly weren't optimal, as Frank just pointed out. But he was witting of the contractors coming down and the potential impacts, and that the mitigations, the over-the-horizon mitigations and remote maintenance, et cetera. But I think everybody recognized with general consensus that nothing's going to replace the contractors on the ground. You're looking at about, if my numbers are correct from my head, I want to say there were about 20,000 or so over the summer of 20. That comes down to about 10 maybe into 21, and then you start glide pathing into maybe 8 or 9. But there's still a significant contractor capability there until we come out in July, or in the first or second week of July. And that's when it basically goes to zero. And the contractors aren't going to stay unless there's American military forces to protect them. And these are DOD contractors, U.S. persons, right? And then there's contractors from Europe, and then there's contractors that are local. So the number of the contracting pieces is a really significant factor to the collapse of the ANSF, in my view.
Given the amount of time that's passed since the American withdrawal, in retrospect, are there any actions that you wish that you would have taken that may have prevented this catastrophe?
I think for me, the biggest thing is to synchronize the withdrawal of the U.S. military with the State Department. And I'm an advisor, not a commander sort of thing. And it's we said it over and over and over again. There's probably other things, I guess, that could have been done. That's my biggest regret, is I go back through all these meetings, et cetera, on that whole issue of the State Department coming out with the military in July, really, is what we're looking at.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
I yield back my time.
Mr. Self. I apologize. Mr. McCormick from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Congratulations to both generals for your retirement. Hopefully you're enjoying that somewhat. And congratulations to Sergeant Tyler Vargas Andrews for his retirement. Hopefully you're enjoying it as well. Thank you for being here today. Listening very intently to your testimonies today, General Milley, when you and I were together last time at the Hash Brief, we went back and we talked about some of the things that happened to create the collapse and kind of the predictability about it. I thought it was interesting that General McKenzie talked about knowing that this was going to be a total collapse of the government pretty early on, when you could see how the withdrawal was working rapidly against us. The interesting thing you talked about, we sustained the mission. You very clearly stated just a second ago, was to make sure that forces were not being trained and deployed from Afghanistan to harm Americans, and it was successful for 20 years. I would agree. When I was there in 2016, there were very few American casualties. It was a relatively peaceful place. I mean, the Afghans were still paying the price. There was a lot of violence, but they weren't training bad guys. But after spending $2 trillion, 20 years 2,462 lives, 20,700 plus casualties, plus the years away we all spent away from our families. We then lost it during the withdrawal. And now how many billions of dollars were left behind for them during that withdrawal? How many billions, gentlemen? 7.2 billion left behind for the enemies to use. And how many training bases are over there now training enemy combatants against the United States? How many bases, approximately?
That I don't know, and it would be an intelligence question for the intelligence
So
community.
the non-classified brief is about 27. So $7.2 billion worth of military gear, some of it brand new, and 27 bases to train enemy combatants now. So I'd say we failed our mission, and we'd already paid the price. That's what irks me, is my friends that are no longer able to come home, my friends who have lost lives and limbs and time away from their family, the money that we spent, the time we invested just to give it back to an enemy that now we're not fulfilling the mission we set out to do. And we did fail miserably, in my opinion, especially on that one day, the withdrawal. To hammer that home, the example that we had, which Sergeant Vargas Andrews so succinctly said during his testimony, is that he testified before about the Kabul airport bombing. In his testimony, he informed the committee that his team was tracking a suspected terrorist who aligned exactly with descriptions given by intel and is believed to be the Abbey Gate bomber. He further testified that after being denied initial permission to engage the suspect, he elevated the issue to his battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Brad Whited. According to Vargas Andrews, when asked if they had permission to kill the suspect, Lieutenant Colonel said, "I don't know." He's now a colonel. I don't understand where we've gone wrong, that we don't have a mission statement that allows a lieutenant colonel in charge of very capable people to make decisions that would save lives and limbs, and then they get promoted for it. I don't understand where our accountability went, not only in our mission, but our withdrawal, and even a mission statement for that very day. Can we speak to that, please? Because if we don't have accountability, then why are we here? Because if we didn't learn our lessons from what we did wrong, why are we here? And if we're not answering to the people who lost lives and limbs, why are we here?
I can speak to the rules of engagement piece. General McKenzie's already spoke to it. The standard rules of engagement that you're familiar with and that Corey Mills is familiar with, and former Colonel Self and everyone, Colonel Waltz, etc. It's positive ID, hostile act, hostile intent, you pull the trigger. You don't have to ask permission of anyone. Every single soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, ship's captain, or fighter pilot has the right to self-defense. And if you perceive, if it is your understanding in that moment in time, whether it's Afghanistan or anywhere else, by the way, except continental United States, if you perceive those conditions to obtain, then you are fully empowered by law to use lethal force if necessary. Now, having said that, I can't speak, and I don't actually know the specifics.
Well, so you don't know, but here's the funny thing, sir, is that neither did the Lieutenant Colonel. I don't know. And I would say that if I was Sergeant, and I'll finish my piece, sir.
Congressman, I know the rules of engagement.
So do I.
Now, I don't know the
I get
specific
you.
incident.
Well, let me tell you what I'm telling you what the testimony was. And here's the problem is, in our litigious society where I've seen soldiers and sailors and Marines get in trouble for making the wrong decision, when they ask their commanding officer, they expect a clear answer, not "I don't know," that costs people lives and limb. And I'll yield with that. Thank you.
My guess is that Congressman Waltz, when he was there, my guess is that perhaps then Sergeant Mills or others that are on this committee engaged the enemy with lethal force and were not asking permission. I don't know the specifics of that particular case, but I know the rules of engagement are clear and they're trained. And I would have to personally interact with Sergeant Vargas, which I have not done yet and I want to, or Colonel Whitehead, I think his name is, or the company commanders, et cetera, to find out what did break down. Obviously, something broke down. If Sergeant Vargas had a positive ID on a known enemy target, and that enemy target was hostile act or hostile intent, the rules of engagement allowed it.